I thought the law of assumption was simple. Whatever you assume to be true becomes your reality. So I assumed success would come, the business would work, and the right things were going to fall into place, but it didn't. So I went back to the basics to understand what this law was actually saying, and I realized I'd been using it completely wrong the entire time. And the moment that actually clicked for me, everything in my life started changing without trying nearly as hard. And in this video, I'll share what the law of assumption is, why it works sometimes but not others, and the one shift that finally made it work consistently for me. Now, when most people use the law of assumption, what they're actually doing is they're assuming a specific outcome, like assuming the money comes, assuming the relationship works, assuming the opportunity shows up, and then going about the rest of the day exactly the same way they always have. And that's the problem, because reality, it doesn't respond to what you briefly assume, it responds to the identity you consistently live from. Think about it this way. Let's say someone wakes up and tells themselves, abundance is coming, things are working out for me, and I'm on the right path. And then an hour later, they're hesitating over a decision that should be very easy to make. Maybe they're quietly anxious about whether things will actually work out for them or not. They're even in their head thinking whether they're good enough. Now, if you see, what is that person actually assuming? Not what they said, what they're living. And this is the part nobody talks about clearly enough. The law of assumption isn't really about assuming an outcome, it's about assuming an identity. In simple language, it's about deciding who you are before reality gives you evidence. Because identity is simply the collection of assumptions you hold true about yourself. For example, for some people it could be, I'm someone who finds opportunities, or I'm someone who things usually work out for, or I'm someone who figures things out. Once these assumptions become your identity, your actions naturally begin to match them. That's why the law of assumption isn't really about what you think for 5 minutes in the morning, it's about who you keep being for the remaining 16 hours of the day. And this is exactly why it feels so inconsistent for most people, because it does work sometimes. Like you do go through a stretch where things are, clicking, where you're feeling grounded, you're not overthinking, opportunities are showing up and you're actually taking them. And during that stretch, the law is working not because you're doing anything special, but because in that state, you're naturally living from the identity of someone who expects life to work out. Then something happens, something doesn't come through, or a result you were counting on doesn't show up the way you expected, and without realizing it, you shift. Like the way you talk to yourself changes, the way you move through your day changes, you start second guessing yourself, you even start contracting. And most people at that moment think that the law stopped working. But that's not what happened. What happened is you slipped back into the identity you've been practicing for years. The one that expects things to be hard, or the one that needs proof before it can relax. Manifestation didn't stop, you just changed who was doing it. Now I'll explain why identity holds this much weight is because there is something in your brain which is known as the reticular activating system. Simply said, RAS. This is your brain's filter, and its job is to scan everything around you and to show you what matches to who you believe you are. Not what you want to be true, what you actually expect to be true underneath. So if your default, not your morning intention, but your actual default is that results are uncertain, that things might not work out, that you haven't fully earned this yet, your brain will go and find evidence of that everywhere. So even when, let's say, an opportunity is sitting right in front of you, you are either not going to see that, or you'll find a reason to just walk past it. And it's because it doesn't match the story your identity is running. This is exactly why you can do the inner work every morning and still feel stuck by afternoon. It's not that the morning didn't count, it's that the rest of your day, your old identity, it's much louder. And you can't out-intention a default you have not even changed. Now let's talk about what actually shifts this. Not a different technique, not more discipline, that's not what I'm talking about. What shifts this is building a different identity and building it specifically to hold up when things aren't going smoothly. I'll share something from my life to make it more concrete. So the first thing I started doing was making a list. This is not affirmations, not like I'm successful, I'm wealthy, something much more practical, and I called it my I'm the type of person who list. This list describes who you believe yourself to be. So instead of writing I'm successful, I would write things like I'm the type of person who stays calm under pressure. I'm the type of person who follows through even when motivation disappears. I am the type of person who finds a solution instead of excuses. And if you notice that none of these mention money, business, or success, they're describing an identity. And identity is what produces those outcomes. And I'll share how my list exactly looked like when I was working on large deals and there was high pressure negotiations. So my list looked something like I'm the type of person who stays composed even when the pressure is high. Or I'm the type of person who finds the angle when it is not obvious. I'm the type of person who doesn't walk away from something difficult just because it's uncomfortable. Now that wasn't wishful thinking, that was identity. And work is not the only place where this applies. I started noticing something very similar in my personal life as well. So whenever I felt uncertain about something, I would ask myself what kind of person I believed I was in that situation. Was I someone who trusted themselves, or was I someone who constantly needed reassurance? That question ended up changing far more than any affirmation ever did for me. And making the list was only the first step. The second step was paying attention to my behavior, because behavior is where identity becomes visible. Not what you say about yourself, what you repeatedly do. For instance, are you refreshing your inbox for some good news or like some breakthrough? Or are you checking your phone waiting for someone to reply? Or are you looking for signs that it's finally working? Now, none of that makes you weak, it just tells you something. It tells you there is still a part of your identity that believes the outcome is uncertain. And once you notice that, don't judge it, question it, and ask yourself, what would the version of me who already believed this was inevitable do instead? Maybe they would put the phone down, maybe they would actually get back to work, maybe they would simply carry on with their day because they weren't waiting for reality to convince them anymore. That's how identity changes, not by forcing yourself to think differently, by repeatedly choosing behaviors that belong to the person you're becoming. Then the third thing is a question I would ask myself whenever I notice myself slipping back into the old patterns. I stop asking, is this working? Because that question usually comes from doubt. Instead, I would ask, does this already feel like it's a part of my life? Or does it feel like something I'm desperately trying to get? There's a huge difference, because when something still feels distant, every setback, it feels like proof it isn't happening. But when something genuinely feels like it's yours, even before it's fully visible, you stop chasing it. You stop needing that constant reassurance, and you stop checking every few minutes for evidence, because your relationship with it changes. And that's when you know your identity has started to shift, not because you repeated enough affirmations, because what once felt impossible now simply feels normal. So it's not about assuming the outcome, it's about becoming the person for whom the outcome feels completely normal. Now most people leave the law of assumption with one question, okay, but how do I actually become that version of myself? That's exactly what I break down in another video on the backwards law, where I show you a practical way to reverse engineer any result and start living it from today. You can watch it right here on your screen or in the description down below, and I'll see you there.